21st century approaches to teaching and learning have been a hot topic in education for a while now. I work at an IB World School, therefore we implement the IB's framework, which identifies 5 transdisciplinary skills that are considered to be essential approaches to teaching and learning. These include thinking, communication, social, research, and self-management skills. These skills are modeled and taught both implicitly and explicitly in all subjects and throughout all of the IB programs. Each program has its own set of more specific sub-skills that are suited for each age group, and the IB allows schools to adapt and augment these sub-skills to fit various contexts. The transdisciplinary skills transcend the use of technology, though we do refer to a separate but correlated set of ICT skills in the primary years program, which are investigating, creating, communicating, collaborating, organizing, and responsible digital citizenship. In my opinion, both the transdisciplinary approaches to learning and PYP ICT skills are less directly concerned with driving productivity than skill sets identified in other 21st century frameworks, though high performance and creative output are still likely if we develop these skills in students. The difference being that this outcome is achieved indirectly, as we are mostly focusing on developing balanced, reflective thinkers and communicators who strive to take responsible actions. In order to hear another point of view, I interviewed an MYP teacher of both English language and literature and individuals and societies. She is a senior teacher, educational innovator, and technophile who has been teaching in an IB program for only a year, so she brings specific expertise and a sufficiently fresh perspective to the conversation. She is also comfortable vocalizing strong opinions and agreeing to disagree. However, there wasn't much cause for dispute in this particular discussion. As you will hear, we see eye to eye on exploiting the benefits of technology for education, especially the Google Suite, the unfortunate hypocrisy of educators who fail to model the 21st century approaches they expect from students, and superiority of actual paper books in a digital age. At one point, she makes a statement that IB students are no better or worse off than IGCSE in terms of developing 21st century skills, which I think must be qualified based on what we consider the essential skills to be. But that's probably as close as we come to a disagreement. What I have learned from my own professional development is very much related to my master's project, that international mindedness is a complex, possibly unachievable goal, much like wisdom or peace, but one which we are still improved by collectively defining and shooting for. Also, that we must often define international mindedness by what it is not, and what emotional and behavioral responses we must overcome to make progress. Our full interview lasted more than half an hour, so this discussion is heavily edited for time and yet still a bit long. Hopefully you find it interesting enough to justify the length.
We base our entire program on the IB framework completely, so we don't add anything in, which is nice for me because IB is more standards based. It does seem to focus more on skills as opposed to content and information, which I do think is part of the 21st century learning because it's skill building, and even though it's not express, that's not in that list of 21st century skills, but the lack of focus on content is. If you look at the 4 C's, you don't have to, content isn't in there.
What's the biggest challenge?
Okay, so let's list the 4 C's just to remind myself even. Critical thinking, creativity, communication, and collaboration. To be perfectly honest, and I think this is personal and this isn't IB related, I think critical thinking is where I'm not as great. But also maybe the schools I teach, I'm not sure if it's the history of my students and where they're coming from, or if it's me.
What's been the biggest opportunity that this framework presents for teaching 21st century skills?
Well, it really offers freedom. So it doesn't have me, and Lang and Lit, sorry to say this if this rankles any of you, but it doesn't force me to teach dead white guys. It makes sure that there's no rules about what I'm teaching. So I can make everything that they're reading and viewing and discussing relevant to them. And because that freedom allows a place where students can build compassion and empathy, and that's a big part of the MYP framework, not in academic terms, but in like how we view the world.
Yeah.
We want to build that. And if I were locked into the more traditional style of what texts you teach, I don't know if I could get there as easily.
Yeah. So the framework allows for
freedom,
which can lead to more real appreciation of diversity and making good people instead of just productive minions.
Yeah, and not like perpetuating a higher value that's placed on like the Western male. It opens up a world of appreciation.
Are there examples of any curricula that you would think would better support students than what?
No, not as a system.
Are there any notable differences, things that you've noticed between students who have experience within IB programs versus students who are new to it?
Okay. What I've noticed is new students struggle. They don't get it. Most of the students that we have had that come from somewhere else come from IGCSE. IGCSE is much more clear, whereas IB is all over the place. I would think that MYP kids going into IGCSE would be just fine.
Yeah. Well, in regards to 21st century skills, like if we stick...
I think it's both. I think that schools doing IGCSE are doing just as much with 21st century skills. Okay. The IB name is what parents want. It looks good on paper.
How do you model 21st century approaches in the classroom?
Creativity is my big one, but that's just this personal preference because I enjoy it. I also find that students generally enjoy it. So I try to be creative in my teaching style. I try to be creative in the activities that we do. I try to be creative just in daily conversation. And I try to promote that in the classroom. So I'm very into the idea of creativity over consumption. So you'll never find me lecturing the class and then like giving a quiz. Like once a student has an information, they must think critically about it and then create something. So that's this other term called critical creativity. So I kind of blend the two. So there's critical thinking, moving from creative into critical thinking. So I tried to build in critical thinking about what we're talking about so that they have to question things, but also how they interpret and express their understanding. Communication. In terms of 21st century skills, I'm a big fan of using tech. So Google is my main go-to. Emailing, sending messages, communicating in that way, I think is just, it makes my life easier because I'm not a super organized person. And then collaboration, again, when you start like implementing collaboration in the classroom, once you start using Google stuff, the collaboration just builds in a way that we couldn't do it before. No.
Have you used any sort of 21st century models? I know you keep referring to the 4 C's, but have you used any that are specific to your subject, or is that just sort of work for you?
I don't really think about it. I do think a little bit about SAMR. Yeah. So in terms of like when I'm using G Suite and Google Classroom, I am trying to always, I'm not even trying it, to be perfectly honest, it's come naturally to me, but I'm cognizant that it doesn't come naturally to other teachers when I'm
I used
kind
to
of
think of Samuel a lot,
pushing.
yeah, but now it's just like,
Yeah, so like that jump was not necessary for me as much, but I do remind myself of it a lot. And just for the listeners, in terms of like the assignments I give would never just be a digital worksheet. My students are never going to receive a PDF
it's like
that they
Bloom's
have to
taxonomy,
fill in.
just thinking of it with tech. You
Right.
want to get up to that creative.
Yeah, so because creativity is important for me, that jump was relatively easy. I think I'm probably at M. I don't know if I'm at R, but I don't know if R, when I look at R, it's almost like you need to have more stuff. You need to have more resources. So I'm not sure. Right, because like I don't have a 3D printer or something like that. So, but I don't know if we also always have to get to R. Do you know? So I don't feel like R is the necessary point every time.
And today's M is
sense?
yesterday's R. So
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
So the next conversation was supposed to be about resources. What technology or resources are available at the school?
Okay.
And how are they used?
Okay. So
What do we rely on?
I rely on Google. I rely on G Suite and Wi-Fi and a projector. And that's about it. And
What resources do you wish you had? If you could have something, is there anything that you would want?
I want every teacher to have a fully stocked, at least, shelf of books. That's what I want. But do you want techie things? Do you want like modern things?
I do want things just in terms of 21st century skills, but I think, you could argue very, very well that books, being
Important.
literate is really important. Holding paper books could be important, and when we're addicted to phones, it's not hard to get our kids to use devices. It's hard to get them off of them. So books are pretty much the answer there.
Yeah, so I'm big on books, and like I was a Kindle person, and then I was like, no, I'm
Good
not
for travel,
remembering. I'm not remembering the title of the book I'm
Yeah, 'cause
reading.
you don't have the smell. I think
And you don't have the touch, and you can't feel like how far along you are. Okay, but resources. Okay, let me think. Hang on. So I guess I would want my computer to be wirelessly connected to my projector.
Apple TV would be great.
Right, something.
Yeah, like 3 rooms have it, I think.
Okay.
at school.
And probably those 3 rooms aren't
Don't
using
even use
it.
it. Yeah, it's the art room. I think it's Mr. Chair. Never mind. No names.
Yeah.
Okay. Professional development. Have you seen these things modeled, at least, in any of the online workshops you've done? Or any workshops you've gone to recently? I think mostly you've done online recently.
I've just done the one IB online thing recently.
Did they effectively model what we're supposed to be learning? Or was it a whole lot of do as we say, not as we do?
I mean, it was a pretty bad workshop. And I am signed up for a course that's happening next week. I haven't been to it, but I was very disappointed when the workshop leader emailed me a Word doc as a survey.
Doesn't she know about Google Forms?
Well, or SurveyMonkey, something. Because how's she going to compile that information?
She's not going to look at it.
Also, how are we learning? Also, why didn't she open that up for the participants to communicate with each other ahead of time? So already I'm a little turned off that she hasn't created a line of communication between participants so we can make connections and communicate ahead of time.
Okay. The last couple of questions are about international mindedness. How does our school define international mindedness? We worked on that. Do you think that you got in some really heated conversations
It
with
was really
some
interesting.
people. What were you picking up? What vibe was there?
Well, okay, I have one comment before we talk about so we did the heart, hands, mind. Is that
Yeah.
okay. So we talked about heart, hands, mind, and then what do we want students to do or be, right, was one
Those
of the
kinds of
questions.
things, yeah.
And so one of my things, oh, I know what it was. Because some people are really into the idea of acceptance. And that's where the heated conversation, I think, came from.
Yeah, you were saying there's a line, there's some things I don't accept.
Yeah.
I don't accept intolerance.
Exactly. I am not open-minded to racism, and I'm not.
Not open-minded to closed minds.
Exactly. And so I think that ties to a 21st century skill, though, because in terms of like international mindedness, because the more you know, the more you're more accepting of things instead of, or accepting of some things and then not other things. So you become more accepting about cultures you maybe didn't know about, but you become less accepting of it when people say racist or prejudiced things. You also become more aware of your own biases, which I think is really important. And I really try to work really hard on that. And I would be like really upset if somebody ever thought that I was racist. So I kind of need people to speak up. Now, being international minded, I realize that there are certain cultures at our school that maybe aren't going to speak up because that would not be cool
that's
or
racist,
okay.
That's
Well, sometimes it's like this culture thing, but sometimes it's about like how different people relate to authority.
Yes, that's a big one in our school.
And that's the biggest one.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because successful leadership is completely connected to expectations of leadership. So how do you really shift it?
Yeah.
And how do you shift it and keep a school truly international? Because being international means bringing in all different kinds of people and all of their expectations.
Yeah.
So
and I love
to break that down and fix it is to de-internationalize.
And I know, and so for me, I struggle with that because we do work with multiple cultures from former Soviet countries, and they're from different places, but they're.
Mm-hmm. I know.
They're very you are a few of their coordinators, and they're like, I would never not do anything he said to do. And I'm like, no, you gotta
which
speak
is
up.
difficult because I'm always saying disagree with me. I want to hear it now, and I can't get any. Yeah.
Right. And so that is something that I'm seeing, and it's not just the former Soviet, but there's different cultures have different hierarchies and like how you react to authority.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a real struggle at this school. I don't know if we ever talk about like we should be able, based on our like biases, reflect on our own behavior and make sure that our behavior isn't a challenge to other people. And I know that mine is. International mindedness is not just being accepting of how other people are, but recognizing that your own behavior affects people also. So you might need to make adjustments sometimes.